Hey everybody, thanks for coming out tonight. As everybody knows, I'm going to share my story. I know some of you have heard it before, but for like I was explaining to Shelly before we started tonight, this is the third or fourth time I've done this, and I've remembered more every time I tell it. So, and there may be parts I forget or skip over or whatever. But also, like I told Shelly, it's a lot easier to remember the truth than back when I was drinking, trying to remember what I told people. Yeah. So I guess to get started, I started, well, not drinking per se, but I shouldn't be surprised that I had a problem with alcohol. My mom had me when she was 16, and they told me stories that mom used to go to the bar when she was pregnant with me, and drink like pitcher after pitcher of draft beer. They used to joke that I was going to be born with a draft pitcher in my hand. Thankfully I didn't have any fetal alcohol syndrome or anything like that. And I don't mean that to joke, but just, that's the reality of it. Now, I was born in 73. It's a vastly different world back then than it is today. And keeping in mind with being in the early 70s, so my mom's obviously my biological mom. The guy that I'll refer to as dad is a guy that mom met while she was pregnant with me. He's the only dad I ever knew. So they were pretty young. So like I said, mom was 16 when she had me. He was only a couple years older. So, by the time I'm 2 years old, a year and a half, 2 years old, she's 18, he's 20. They have friends over. I was a cute little toddler that would walk around the party, getting sips of everybody's beer. When they were basically done entertaining me or having me entertain them, um, they would send me on my way. So one thing I figured out, I'm told, because obviously I don't remember any of this, is my old man used to leave the bottom, like a mouthful or so of beer in the bottle. And I figured out, because he always left his case by the fridge, and one of their parties, they found, after I'd been cut off and sent on my way, they found me asleep on top of the case of beer by the fridge that he would put his empties in, and the empties were actually empty. So after I got done, I would go and finish those and go from there. But that was the end of my drinking for probably about 13 years. I certainly didn't drink like that while I was a kid. And really, I didn't start drinking, probably, 15 or something like that. But to give a little bit of a background, we moved around a lot. Um, when I was when I was in my late 30s, actually sat down and figured out, just through a conversation, wanted to figure out all the different roofs I had lived under my entire life. And at age 38, I had lived under 33 different roofs. So, I was in multiple school systems. I was always trying to make new friends. I was always trying to fit in. So, there's that part of it. And then there was, growing up wasn't horrible for the most part as a kid. Like, it was just, most normal stuff. Um, but there's few things that I remember now. And I remember that um my parents, they had my sister when I was about 8 years old. And so, I consider my sister, I love my sister. I still talk to my sister. Everything's good like that. But, there was one incident in particular that really, in my mind, you know, started the emotional turmoil, we'll call it, with my parents. And it's when my sister, she was supposed to come right home after school. I was supposed to meet her because my parents were working or somewhere. So I don't fucking know where they were. But anyway, so I came home when I was supposed to. She didn't show up. I went looking for her. I went up to the apartment, down to the apartment, went over to her school, everything else. And I still didn't know where she was. And when my parents did show up, they saw that I didn't have her and they freaked out at me, assuming that I had done something wrong or I'd went to hang out with my friends or something. And my mother told me, if anything happens to her, I'm going to fucking kill you. And really, that's the point I really think it started. And anyway, so fast forward, we moved again back across the country, back into a new school system. Um, and just, being a teenager, 14, 15 years old, like I think, me and a couple of buddies, we hung out, we drank, stole some of their parents' booze or something, nothing major, or whatever. But as I got, 14, 15, my, things started to go just bad with my parents. They would, I remember my father going to me saying, what's wrong with you? Are you on drugs or whatever? And at this point, I didn't do anything. I, barely touched anything. And he says, like, I know you're just being a teenager, but I don't have time for your fucking bullshit. So, things got, there was a lot of emotional abuse. And then that graduated to physical abuse, where they both would hit me over certain things. Um, anyway, I ended up going to my guidance counselor about it. So when I was just barely 16 years old, I got pulled out of the house by social service and I got put in a group home. And again, I'm pulled out of my school system. I'm whole new set of friends, whole new school, or trying to make friends, not a set of friends, but and kids I'm in the group home with, a lot of them, they knew each other from other group homes and stuff like that. So it was, me trying to fit in. And it was the late 80s. Anybody, I know there's a few in here that would know, but basically like Skid Row was out and like 18 in Life and Youth Gone Wild, those were our anthems in the group home. That's what we lived by. That's what we thought. You know, line from Skid Row song, you can't think about dying when the bottle's your best friend. And that's, we're all just trying to escape, just trying to quiet the noise, trying to, nobody can tell us what to do. Anyway, I was in the group home for a few months, timed out of the group home, and got my own apartment at 16 years old. My roommates were probably 2, 3 years older than me. So there's always alcohol around the apartment. And to fit in, I started, you know, drinking as well. And at 16 years old, and you have your own apartment and a place for you and your friends to drink, people are pretty happy to come over and hang out with you. So, I did that lived in that apartment for a few months, and I was about to fly across the country to go live with my aunt and uncle out in Alberta, um, to give me a better chance of finishing high school and all that kind of stuff. And at the 11th hour, my mother made my father call and asked me to come home. And there was no apology about the abuse. There was, like just growing up, nothing was ever talked about. You didn't talk about your feelings. If anybody did anything, whether it was me or them, it happened. It was just brushed under the rug, and you went on with your life like nothing had ever happened. And when they asked me to come back, and I kind of had a new set of friends, or these roommates and people in that circle I'm starting to hang out with, and I didn't want to really go out west again. So I opted to go home, and like, never mind the abuse, never mind all the other stuff that happened. The only thing I told them is if I'm going to come home, I'm going to be able to drink. That was my that was my demand. Um, which tells you how fucked up that is. But anyway, so went home, continued to drink. And again, just got in, still hung out with these older people. I had a few friends in high school that we hung out together, and they would hang out with me and the older guys. And it just basically, not to go into relive my teenage years, but basically from the ages of like 16 to 23, um, people used to joke that it seemed like I basically lived in a beer commercial. All we did was drink. That's just all we did all the time. And it just got to become normal. Just like there was never any thought that there was anything else that should be done. Like if we weren't working, we were drinking. Like it's just the way life was. When I was 23, I met my now ex-wife. Um, we dated very briefly, got engaged, but from the time we met till the time we got married, I think was like 4 months. And when I got together with her, I kind of slowed down. Sort of in a way, I started to kind of go into a quiet period with the drinking, but right around that time, I also started my professional career in the construction industry, and I started to travel. And the construction industry is pretty, especially when you're on the road, there's a lot of drinking once you're done shifts. Like basically, you went home or you went back to the hotel, you just went out for something to eat, had a few beers, then you'd end up at a bar or a strip club or somewhere. And so I would drink when I was on the road. I come home, I'd still drink when I came home, but it wasn't nearly as much as when I was on the road. We were married for about 9 years. Wasn't particularly fun. Shockingly enough, the marriage didn't end because of drinking or anything, because I rarely, I shouldn't say rarely, not very often I would drink around her. But it was another emotionally abusive relationship with her, for as far as her towards me. And she ended up going back to we anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, but basically she was going back to Ontario. We were living here and didn't really ask me, just basically told me she was going to go and take our, you know, 8-month-old son and go back and live in Ontario, and didn't really give me a choice. But what that did is when I was on my own, I realized that I wasn't an idiot. I didn't do everything wrong, and I was actually an okay guy. So through a lot of conversation I had an uncle who had been divorced a couple of times, and I talked to him, and through a lot of conversation, I made the decision that I wanted to end the marriage. And I did that because I didn't, we used to fight a lot, and I didn't want my son to grow up thinking that was normal. And so when we finally split and she was up there, now I could drink whenever I wanted to drink. And I was grieving the loss of the marriage. I was grieving the loss of my son. And basically, that's 20, well, it'll be about 22 years ago now. Um, Maybe not quite that long, but I, since that time, I basically, until I got sober, I drank every day. Not every day and it started out as a habit and something I could do because nobody could tell me I couldn't. And it became need, and I never saw it coming. I got into a relationship after that with an ER nurse. We lived together. And once I was away from my ex-wife and I was drinking on my own all the time, then I started drinking and driving. And I would do that fairly regularly. No, there's no transit here, or there wasn't at that time. There's limited now. But yeah, so it wasn't uncommon to drink and drive. And I don't know what, so probably 18 years ago, again, the girlfriend was working at the ER. She was working an overnight shift. I went out after work with a bunch of people, drank a bunch, drove home, and drove my car off. It's called Dead Man's Corner off an embankment. And I was upside down in the car for probably figure about 6 or 7 hours because I didn't get found till the next morning when a fisherman was going to work. So they rushed me to obviously to the ER. I ended up being in ICU for 5 days. I don't remember the last day I woke up. The only thing I remember was going in and them cutting my clothes off, and I don't remember anything till I woke up 5 days later. Now, because I was dating an ER nurse, by the time they got me in, she had just gotten off, so we crossed. So she didn't see me when I came in. But because I knew all the nurses and the doctors, when the RCMP wanted blood samples, they didn't take them because they didn't want me to get charged. So I wrote off my car, ICU for 5 days, and I had no repercussions because I never got charged. And probably, I think the day I got out of the hospital, I was taking painkillers and started drinking and just continued on like that. And really, that's the story. Like, alcohol just, like, it was always like, when am I going to drink it? Like, there was never any question. It's like I was going to drink. It's like, by the end, or not even by the end, a very long time ago, like, I wouldn't do anything that didn't involve alcohol. I wouldn't go to a restaurant that wasn't licensed. I wouldn't go out for breakfast until 9 a.m. because that's when they could start serving alcohol. If we were going out, I would drag my feet and make sure we didn't get there till after 9 so that I could drink in the morning. If it was a weekend and I wasn't working, then from the time I woke up, didn't matter if I woke up at 7 a.m., didn't matter if I woke up at 10 or 11, because I had been that drunk the night before. First thing I did was drink. That's just what I did. And I didn't see any issue with that. A year or so after that, this time I got caught for impaired. Wasn't in an accident, anything like that. But finally there was some consequences. Nothing really too major happened with that, but again, so it was the first time I was charged with a DUI. That's probably 17 years ago. 16, 17 years ago. And then I just, again, kept, get home from jail. First thing I do is crack a beer to calm my nerves, to quiet the noise, to just deaden everything. Anyway, that relationship ended a couple years later. Again, really nothing to do. She had her own substance use issues with prescription pills and stuff like that. So, it went its course and moved on. And again, just the same pattern behavior, just drinking all the time. It'd be nothing to be drinking and driving. Like, wouldn't fizz me one little bit, wouldn't think anything of it. If I went Actually, no, this has happened a little bit longer. So anyway, so still drinking every day. So a couple years later, where I'm working, then I left the place I was at. I moved to another company where I was the general manager. So I had pretty much full say. I could do whatever I want. The owner wasn't in the building. The owner was at a province. And I would start at lunchtime things are stressful, whatever, I go out at lunch and have a couple beer. And then met guys at the bar and they were doing the same thing. And then that turned into some days, yeah, I might have 2 or 3 beer at lunch, go back to work, have a great afternoon. Some days I might not go back and I drive home. And I was getting away with it. There was no way to tell me otherwise. Things were great. And now I met my wife now in the middle of all this. I'd met her. We dated for a couple of years. We got married. But this was all going on this entire time. Of course, I wouldn't, I wouldn't tell her this stuff. I would always try and race, if I knew she was working, if I would stop at the bars after work to have a couple of beers, sometimes I'd stop at more than one bar. My idea was always that I'd get home before her if I didn't get home before her, the first thing I would do when I got in the house was, before I did anything, was run to the fridge, grab a beer, take a swig of it, so that if she smelled beer in my breath, I could blame it on the beer I just had. Um, and my behavior continued, but I never got caught. Lots of times I should have. There's a couple different times I actually got pulled over and was able to pretend I was sober enough that they didn't think anything of it, and I got away with it. Um, and then 505 days ago, I got done at work early on a Friday afternoon, drank. My wife was working. I knew she'd be working till 9:30, 10 o'clock, and sat at the bar. Was only planning to be there for a couple hours and drive home, which I shouldn't have been driving anyway at that point. But for whatever reason, just other people showed up, and I kept drinking, and you know, ended up being at the bar for probably 5, 6 hours, drinking steadily, and drove home and rolled my truck. And I rolled the truck. I was able to get out of it on my own. And I walked away from it without so much as a scratch or a bruise, like nothing. And I was very cooperative with the police constable. Like there's nothing I could do. And in my head, I knew I had put the truck on its roof. I knew that, but in my head, I'm like, okay, well, I'll get it towed, flip it over, it'll it'll be okay. It's not as bad as it was, but no, the truck was wrote off. Anyway, so go to the police station, cooperate, get home about 10:30. My wife's looking for me. She had just gotten home from work, and walk in the door. And of course, we have a big fight. I have to tell her. I took me a minute or two before I admitted I had rolled the truck, or I put it on its roof. I still thought the truck was fine. And I'm like, I can't deal with this right now. So I went to bed. Of course, we slept in separate rooms. And the next morning, when we get up, first thing I wanted was a beer. That's all I wanted was a beer. I just needed to calm my nerves. But I somehow managed to tell myself no. And really, probably the only reason that I was able to tell myself no is because I knew my wife would be beyond wild if I had a beer after rolling my truck drunk the night before. Um, a couple things here and there. So we ended up, she wanted to take me to the impound to get my personal belongings out of the truck, because she didn't believe me that the truck wasn't that damaged. Good call. And we got to the impound, and I saw the truck, and I couldn't believe that I walked away from it. And it just finally pieced together that I had to stop drinking. Like there was no way I was ever going to moderate. I had tried lots of times to moderate, different times of my drinking to get out of hand. And she would say, she never asked me to quit, but she asked me to either slow down or not get as drunk. And I'd always say I would. And anytime I tried to control my drinking, I didn't have fun. And when I had fun, there was no controlling it. And I just, it was, I don't know what you want to call it. It was an epiphany, a realization, whatever it was. I just knew that I had to stop drinking. There was no, if I didn't, then either I was going to kill somebody else or I was going to kill myself. That's the only two logical outcomes, for the amount that I drove and drank. So that morning, she ended up going to work. Uh, you know, I called the provincial treatment center, and got a very nice woman on the phone. And it was the first time in my life I ever admitted to anybody that I had a problem, to myself, to another individual. I was always like, oh no, I can quit anytime I want. I have complete control over alcohol. And nothing was further from the truth. And I couldn't see it. And I look back now and it's so crystal clear that I had a problem, but I couldn't see it when I was in the middle of the addiction. I, I refused to see it. Anyway, so I talked to them. I copied down 4 or 5 different phone numbers, and I got the, number for AA to look up me, or a website to look up meetings around me, and all that stuff. And then I hung up with her. I I had a bunch of beer in the fridge and told myself I have to pour them out because I don't trust myself to not drink them. So I poured the ones I had upstairs out. Messaged a couple of people I knew on social media, people that I'd known years ago, not buddies I hung out with, but people I know from years gone by. And from their social media feeds, I knew they were both, one was recently sober within a few months, the other had been sober for a couple of years. So I reached out to both of them, had long conversations. They told me what they did, encouraged me, go to meetings, go to detox, do whatever you got to do. Because it was worth it. Uh, so I was pretty set. I'm like, yeah, I need to stop. And then I remembered I had a full bar downstairs, which is the room I'm sitting in now. Um, but I knew that, because I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll go down, I'll get the beer, I'll have to bring it upstairs because I don't have the sink down here, so I'll have to take it upstairs to pour it out. This is going to be a while. I'm like, well, I'll just have a couple while I'm pouring it out, and then I'll stop. But thankfully, I knew that I wouldn't stop. So I called back the 1-800 number at Addictions, and thankfully here they actually have a service where they sent out a social worker and a mental health team to the house, and they came out and they helped me pour the beer out. I am I definitely know if they hadn't done that, I definitely would have drank that day. And if I had, I don't know that I ever would have been able to stop. Um, After they came out and did that, I finally got up the courage to call my best friend. And we've been best friends since high school. When I was going through everything with my parents, I spent a lot of time at his house. I had my own room there. Um, I've always thought of his parents as more as as sort of parents to me, sort of the parents that I needed. Um, I haven't talked to my parents in I don't know how many years now. Uh, Told him what's going on. He didn't judge. He didn't say anything. All he said was, "When are you going to your first meeting?" And I told him, I said, "Look, I checked it out. There's one where I live out in the country, uh, and the one for our area was the night before, and there, I had already missed the ones on Saturday. So I said, well, there's one tomorrow in the city." He says, "I'll come out, I'll get you, I'll take you in, we'll go." So I went to my first AA meeting, and I didn't know what to think of it. I knew I had to go. On our way there, we drove by one of the bars that I used to stop at on the way home. And I literally, my mouth watered driving by the bar. And all I wanted to do was pull in there and have a beer before the meeting. Now, I knew I could. That's what I wanted. I didn't try and convince him to pull over or anything like that. Um, he went to the meeting with me. I didn't know what to think. First time I'd ever been to an AA meeting. And, thankfully it's a room full of really good people. And like I shared in that first meeting and basically just like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm being charged with impaired. I wrote up my truck, like just blah, 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 blah. And they just listened and said, look, says nobody starts going to AA because their life's going well. you're not sitting by the pool and sunshine and everything's going good. And yeah, I think I'll start AA. Something had to have happened. So, I was going to AA meetings again because I couldn't drive. A, I didn't have a license. B, I didn't have a vehicle. So I was going to the ones in the city where I worked. And I would get either coworkers or friends to, there was a noontime meeting. So I do that on my lunch hours and I'd have to ask people for drives. And I did that for a couple months. And then nobody ever said anything. If I asked for a ride, somebody was going to take me. But in my mind, I, and I don't know if it was me trying to subconsciously not go to the meetings or what, but in my mind, I felt I had sort of used up all my favors and I didn't want to ask anybody. Thankfully, around this time, I was going through my social media and I was unfollowing all of the drinking pages and party pages that I followed. And I was trying to find sobriety pages. Because I knew I had to stop drinking. Um, I didn't want to, but I knew I shouldn't say it. I wanted to, but I didn't know how to navigate life without alcohol. Um, so anyway, then one of the pages I found was Brad's and Sober Motivation, and started listening to him, started listening to his podcast. And again, for any of you that are close to my age, in the early '90s, there was a movie called Pump Up the Volume. Christian Slater, he I could relate to him. He was a teenager who'd been uprooted and put in this new town. He didn't know anybody at school. He didn't fit in. And he started a pirate radio station. And he would get on there, and it was like this voice in the dark just telling the truth about all of the teenage angst and bullshit and fucking parents and teachers and everything else. And I told Brad right off the bat, I said, you were my voice in the dark. I said, that's what it reminded me of from the first time. So through Brad, listening to the podcast, I was still going to AA meetings, but then I came across Sober Buddy and found a community with other people I could share with. I'm grateful for AA. I wouldn't be where I am today had I not started out in AA. And again, I don't AA, and one thing I've learned in this time that I've been sober is AA is different everywhere. I mean, AA is all around the world, right? Like the AA meetings I was going to was a busy meeting, be 20 people. And I've heard stories in these rooms of people with like 100, 200 people in AA meeting. And there's different, it's just a little, so I'm not trying to lump AA all the same because I know they're all different meetings. But I like the community aspect of it because we could talk. Like in AA, you listen to somebody share, and that's great. I always got something that of didn't matter if there was 8 people in the meeting or 20 people in the meeting. I always got something from everybody's share. Some are more relatable than others, but I always got something out of it. But when I found community, like these Zoom meetings where you can talk and you can connect, that made all the difference in the world. A lot of you I know from, from starting out at Sober Buddy. Um, and then, for my own reasons, I decided to leave Sober Buddy the end of 2023. And thankfully, Destiny and Lauren had started Raw. And the community here with Raw has been, again, we're friends. We check in on each other. Like there's multiple people a day. Most days I'm talking to multiple people, and that's what helps me get through. But that community, that connection, that was the absolute game changer for me in my sobriety. Um, realized that I wasn't alone, that a lot of us have the same issues. And the more that I talk about my issues, um, the more it helps me remember stuff and then I have to deal with stuff. And then being able to help others. Like that's been being able to give back and offer words of encouragement or offer people my experience to help them, deal with theirs. That's, been a huge part of my recovery. So, um, I know I missed a whole bunch of stuff. Anybody that's heard me talk before, but Des, did you have any questions before we open it up to anybody?
Yeah, I do. I have a few, but I want to start here. I guess my first question is, and I'm sure a lot of people here have their own. It can be very similar answers, but it can also be each their own. So I guess the first one that I'd like to ask is what. Candy's not that one. What does community mean to you? Like, what what makes a community a strong community? And what do you look for in community?
Well, the community is like to me, um, community is like-minded people, people that have the same interests, have the same goals, and understand what you're going through, and you can understand what they're going through, and being there for each other. Um, I couldn't imagine trying to do this alone.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm gonna go back to the top. And I know we've kind of went along these lines in the room before, but um, I don't know. I just couldn't help but want to ask this. If you could tell your younger self one thing, what do you think it would be?
Put the bottle down. It's not, the bottle is not your friend. All the songs we used to listen to, like a bottle's your best friend, like it's just not. And just, I was so used to not, because of the way I was brought up, where we never talked about anything, nothing got dealt with. Alcohol was an easy way to not have to deal with anything because it just, I used to joke for years. I used to joke that I drank so much because there was things inside of me that needed to die. Like it's so yeah, so put the bottle down. It ain't gonna help.
Get off the sauce, right?
Off the sauce, baby.
um. Okay, so this is a total personal question because I like picking at you for this. But what is your favorite, like your all-time favorite, or the one that you catch yourself saying the most? Cliche.
Cliche. Um, one day at a time. It really it is because and the one day at a time became more important to me the further I went. Um, a lot of you know that as I was coming up to a year, I was getting antsy, not because I wanted to drink, but because I was more worried um that I would get complacent. And it's like, well, I hit a year, well then what? And did a lot of meetings, and I just came to the conclusion that it truly is one day at a time. But sort of, I know you didn't ask this, but sort of tie into that, two of the two big parts of my recovery have been the one day at a time, attitude, and also the serenity prayer. Like the serenity prayer, I really think has been, it's really become a way of life. Um, like when when I'm stressed, when I got a bunch of stuff on my mind or anything like that, like I just go back to serenity prayer and accept things I can't change and have the courage to change the things I can. It really, other than the word God being in it, because I personally struggle, and that's probably one of the other reasons why I didn't stick with AA again, probably in a subconscious level, is because I know a lot of people in here very much God is their higher power, whether they had God before they got sober or trying to get sober or whatever. And I'm not trying to disrespect that, but for me personally, I have a lot of reasons why I just can't wrap my head around God. And I do, and again, it's just a sticking point. I know in AA they talk about, God as you understand him. Okay, I get that. Intellectually, I understand, but I just can't wrap my head around it. But I do think there's a higher power because it's the only reason I can think I walked away from that accident. The only reason why I didn't die the first time I rolled a vehicle. And the only I guess the other thing as I started on this journey and I was sort of dealing with that stuff is why didn't I die? And the best, not the best, that's not the right word to say it, but the main thing that I can think of, the reason I didn't die is so that I could try and help others on their recovery journey. And that's why I'm so passionate. One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about it, one of the reasons why I'm so vocal. As most of you know, my Instagram page, and I'm very outspoken about it and everything else, but that's a personal decision I made. And I don't expect everybody to get on that or anything at all like that. But for me, more people that, and I've had, even early on, I've had, just the little bit of sharing that I did, it I had people that I knew in my real life that I knew in person, not real. This is my real life now. Um, that were said, "Hey, I need help. Can you help me with this?" And that, it started to click. It's like, wow, like just talking about it makes a difference. So to me, that's the only thing that I can explain how I walked away, and that's the higher power that I can't define, that I'm still working on trying to figure that out. Laura S sent me a direct message. How did you deal with those things you felt that had to die after you no longer drank? Uh well, when I stopped drinking and I started to actually have to deal with real life and had to deal with consequences, um I just had to start talking about things. And that's what these rooms, I've been able to talk about. I've been able to talk in these rooms about, things from my childhood. There's things like that. When I did Brad's podcast, which was sort of the second time I told my story, I'm in the middle of doing the podcast with him, and I remembered that when I was in the group home, um, it was supposed to be there was a counseling session that was set up between my parents and myself, and the counselor be there, try and mediate and figure that out. And they never showed up. And so it's like, why? And again, I had forgotten about this for almost 30 years. And but that gets back into why I felt like I wasn't enough. And again, one of the things I was trying to bury and forget about was that, they couldn't bother. It's not like I had, broke in somewhere or stole something or stole a car or something like that, and I was in this group home because I was bad. No, I was in the group home because you fucking beat me. And they lied to the social worker that night. He's like, well, Michael, why are you telling these stories? Well, I'm not telling fucking stories. So, but the more that I talk about this stuff and the more I get it out, or the more that and that's not even about me talking, it's about listening to you all talk and share your stories. There's sometimes I hear some of you share, and I'm like, damn, yeah, that makes sense. That's why that. So communication and and just talking about addiction, talking about how we grew up, talking about the trauma. That's how I get past. And again, there's days, it's not that I want to drink. There are days that happen, and it's a reaction to a situation that, yeah, I'd love to have a drink and just numb out and not worry about it. Um, I had anyway, my best friend's mom, lady I called mom, she died. She had cancer. She died a couple months after I got sober. She was in palliative care. I went to see her a couple times near the end, and she deliberately had my friend leave the room because, of course, I couldn't drive, so he picked me up and we went there to see her together. She sent him off to get something, and she did that deliberately so her and I could have a conversation. And she just told me, she said, I'm proud of you for not drinking and giving it up, but don't you she was a little worried that because we knew she was going to die, that I might start drinking again. She's like, don't you drink. And I said, yes, mom. And the first weekend, well, a few days after that conversation was my first weekend I spent in jail because of my DUI. And she died my second night in jail. And I of course didn't find out till Monday morning when I get out because I was just doing weekends. And I I was upset, of course, that she died, and I knew that. And I was more upset that I couldn't be there for my best friend who was like a brother to me. That my drinking had taken the ability away for me to be there and support him. And a few months after that, my brother-in-law passed away, my wife's brother. And I am so grateful that I was sober and that I could be there for her and support her. And, I still can drive, but at least I could be present and I could do the things that need to be done. And where I'm going with these two things is, so I had these two people that were close to me die. And yeah, it fucking hurt. And yeah, I wanted to drink because I just didn't want to have to think about it. But I knew they were major things. I knew I would want to drink, and I knew I had to stay focused. I knew I had to go to meetings. I knew I had to stay on the path. And I say that because for me personally, when things like that happen or something major happens, it's not easy, but I know I have to focus. I know I have to focus on my recovery, whether it's go to meetings, reach out to somebody, something. I know I need to do that. Everyday life is what can trip you up in a heartbeat. If you're not, again, I don't mean you, for me, everyday life, I can see how everyday life would trip me up if I wasn't going to these meetings online, if I wasn't talking about my feelings that I never talked about. And, I'm 50 years old. I got sober at 49, and I never talked about my feelings until I got sober. And I'm dealing with a lifetime of that, trying to figure out how to feel feelings. So, yeah, I guess that's, sorry, Laura, that was a pretty long-winded answer but once I got going with it. Yeah, okay, I got another message, but that's not really a question, so but you're welcome. Okay. Anybody else?
Well, I haven't unmuted everyone yet. I have one question
Yep,
that's kind of like two in one.
yep.
Because you answered my other one. Um, so I guess like to kind of end it, I like how we ended when I did the podcast. It ended like this, and I just really liked it. Um, so you just hit 500 days, so you're a little over a year. So there's people all over with different dates and different time. Um, so like I'm trying to think of the best way to word this question. I guess it'll be two in one, like I said. So like if you could give any advice to someone who's like approaching that year mark and they're feeling those feelings of, oh, I'm coming up on a year, or they're close to, they're getting close to that milestone. Like, what advice would it be? And would it be any different than someone who's like very early on, like in the first 90 days? You understand what I'm asking? It's kind of a,
Yeah, no, I
yeah.
understand what you're asking. My answer is mainly the same, is take it one day at a time. Um, like that's all we can control. We don't, first of all, we don't know if we're gonna have tomorrow. Secondly, if I think about, I've never said I will never drink again. I have said I don't intend to ever drink again, but I've never said I will never drink again for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm an alcoholic. And I spent enough years telling people I would slow down, drink less, be better behaved when drinking, and all that stuff. And I could never do it. And when that first day, when I really thought my, I was pretty good odds that my marriage was going to be over after that. And I wouldn't have blamed her one little bit. But look, I know I've told you time and time again that I would slow down or anything like that. I said, for me to sit here and tell you that I'm never going to drink again, I said, there's no sense in that. I said, all I can do is show you every day that I'm not going to do it. And if you will stick with me and let me try and do that, then I can show you, because I know words are meaningless. Um, I would say the same thing to somebody early on, like say, either freshly sober or under 90 days, but there's a little more, there's always work. Doesn't matter if you've got 2 days or if you've got a year. Like, you've always got to put the work in. And again, another one of the cliches is sobriety is not an event. It's a decision we make every day. And we just got to keep making that next right choice. You got to play the tape forward. Just remember that, things, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So, do you have anything else, Tess? Thank you, Veronica.
Yeah, sorry, I was typing.
Yep.
So I'm done with my questions, but I want to get my piece in, and then I'll let the room fly open. There's a few things that you touched on. Um, oh man, and it all leaves me, and then you start sharing again, and I get it back. Um, okay, there was part where you said you weren't really sure about your higher power and that whole thing, and then like, but if you knew one thing, or if you could gather a thought, that it would essentially be that you're still here to help other people. And like, I just want to make sure that you know that you do. Like, I remember some of the things that you said, like the relationship with your wife. That's just the last thing that is fresh. I've heard you say that to people before, telling other people about your situation to shed a little light on how, what's coming for them. And like, I truly don't think that you see how powerful you are. I remember you're one of the first faces that I remember coming into Sober Buddy, and you you welcomed me in, and you made me feel like I had a spot there. And like, look at how many people are here. Like, you know what I mean? Look at how many people that you help every single day. So I just really wanted to let you know, like, you are powerful, and like, I'm proud of you. I'm glad to call you a friend. And a lot of the stuff that you went to, like, it hurts my heart to, like, even imagine, like, you being in a relationship where you were belittled or treated as less than you deserved. And like, just to hear your story, and I've heard some of this on the podcast that you've done, and it just amazes me. Like, I am honored. I'm grateful to call you a friend and to have you to bounce ideas off of, and to go for advice. Like I've told you before, if I want true, raw, like, this is what it is, like, you're one of the first people that I go to. And I just, I don't really think that there's anything more I can say than, like, I really appreciate you, and I'm glad that you stayed up past your bedtime to do this tonight. And like, I just want to say again, like, I just hope like, how many people you really do impact. Because I think it's a lot more than So I
Yeah.
will I'll open up the room
All right.
so everyone.
And I
Yeah.
appreciate that, Des, but the one thing, and I've said it again, anyone's known me any amount of time, is as much as I'm not, whether it's, yeah, sure, if I give advice or I give a suggestion or whatever, to somebody that's, and whether, sometimes it's people that have more time than me, and same thing, like well, I just, sure, I got 500 and some days, and that's great. That's awesome. That's a great achievement, but I don't got things figured out. I'm just another guy in recovery, finding my way, grateful for these rooms and grateful for all of you, because as much as I may seem like I have a pearl of wisdom or something that I can pass along, as much as I'm telling it to you all, I'm telling it to myself at the same time. And that's the part that I find. I know me, and I know if I didn't go to,
Can you unmute? I'm sorry. I
there we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So like
Sorry.
I said, if I know if I didn't go to meetings and I wasn't engaged in these conversations all the time, I know it would be very easy to forget all this stuff. And even talking to my addictions counselor, like I still see my addictions counselor at least once a month. And it it I just know, and we've talked about it, like he people relapse after a period of time, and there's all various reasons, but a pretty common denominator is that people stop going to meetings and they stop being engaged with the community, whatever community they're in, whether it's AA or just counseling or whatever. Once you get away from that, because your addiction is patient, it will sit there and wait until you let your guard down. That's what I go back to about that everyday life. It can sneak up. Like if I wasn't constantly engaged in having these conversations, no doubt in my mind that'd be very easy for me to relapse.
So I'm still recording, so 1 second.
Yep.
I guess to end it off, I just want to thank you again, and everyone should be able to unmute now. I'm gonna stop.
And